Welcome to another edition of our StaySmart newsletter and podcast. This week we're going to be talking about apartment rent controls, alternative accommodations, airline boarding policies, and the short-term rental space. So if you haven't seen our podcast before or read our newsletter, this is just information that we think is going to be relevant to you and to your company. So the first article that we have is out of Philadelphia. It's about what they say, there's the city council there is trying to restrict what they call price fixing, but it's really something we've talked about on this podcast before, is about apartment owners are using software, algorithms that take this data, this pricing data, and tells the apartments what to set the rent at. The city of Philadelphia is saying that this is price fixing. In particular, it's going after RealPage's software. This is something that, like I said, we've talked about on this podcast before, but this is the first time I've seen a city other than San Francisco put something like this in place, trying to ban basically this form of pricing or yield management in the apartment industry. So it's something to watch, because I think we'll see, the Justice Department had been going after RealPage and some other companies that set pricing for apartment communities. Be interesting to see how this turns out. And then there's an article about Wyndham Hospitality signing a 10-year agreement with Reside. Reside is kind of an alternative accommodation, service apartment, corporate housing company, been around a long time. So they announced this partnership. It's a 10-year partnership at 5 properties throughout the U.S. as Houston, Seattle, some future properties that Reside's going to be managing these apartments, alternative accommodations. And it's really interesting because we just talked on a previous podcast about Sonder and their partnership with Marriott. So it is interesting to see as this industry kind of matures, the alternative accommodation industry, short-term rental, midterm rental, whatever you want to call it, as it matures, and we see it kind of melding with traditional hospitality companies like Wyndham and like Marriott. If we continue to see this kind of partnerships, and again, just more opportunities for these kinds of hospitality or these kinds of lodging arrangements in traditional hospitality industry. So interesting article there. And then we have an article about American Airlines and their boarding policy that they've tried out in a couple of their airports, and basically this is trying to cut back on line jumpers, people that are boarding ahead of where they should be boarding. Everybody that flies and sees this or knows this, but it's basically just an audio noise that sets off if you try to scan your boarding pass before you're supposed to be boarding. So I think it's really, I'd love to see this kind of spread throughout the boarding policies with most airlines, but really, can't we all just be in the line that we're supposed to be in? So really interesting article about American Airlines. And then the last article we have comes from Skift. They're talking about the short-term rental and the growth in the short-term rental space slowing. It's not stopping, it's just slowing. Where we saw 2 years ago, short-term rental space, we were seeing 20% growth. And now in this article, it says 10%. I've seen some places say single digits. So as this short-term rental space matures, we're seeing that growth decelerate a little bit. So this would be interesting. And we've seen revenue growth, we've seen ADR growth, and I think some of that has just been kind of the short-term rental operators passing on costs that they've incurred over the last couple of years. So I would agree. I think they're slowing growth, maybe even more than this article says. So some good information. That's what I saw happening this week. If there's something that you would like to see us talk about, please let us know. Otherwise, that's what I see transitioning this week. Take care, everyone.